and welcome back to Books and Things. Today I'm going to be doing the A to Z tag. I was tagged by Shelley from Sholly the Wobbles, whose channel I will link down below, and I'm going to tag Verity from Nerdy English Girl and Lauren from Lauren the Books. I would love to see your responses. So, let's go! A. Author you've read the most books by. Without a doubt, Charles Dickens. I've read all of his 14 completed novels and several of his unfinished and shorter works. Although, I have seen more Shakespeare plays than I've read Charles Dickens novels. It's not quite the same as reading them, but I've seen 29 Shakespeare plays, I think. So, the author I have read the most by is Charles Dickens, but the author I have experienced the most from is Shakespeare. B. Best sequel ever. I'm gonna say A Buyer's Market from Anthony Powell's series A Dance to the Music of Time. This is a 12-book series that spans in time from the 1920s to the 1970s and was written between the 1950s and the 1970s, and it basically follows one man's life and all the people he meets in his life. This is the second book in the series and set in the 1920s. I am fascinated by 1920s British history and I absolutely loved this book. One of my favourite books in the series, and the series is one of my favourite literary works of all time. C. Currently reading. I am currently reading How to Be Both by Ali Smith. I am just over halfway through, as you can see, and yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. I really want to read some more by Ali Smith. D. Drink of choice while reading. Tea, of course. E. Ebook or physical book. I do have a Kindle. My Kindle is currently masquerading as Wuthering Heights, as you can see. I, in general, prefer to read physical books. Like, I find it nicer, and I know that if I buy a physical book, I'm much more likely to actually read it than if I just buy it on Kindle. A lot of things just go forgotten about on my Kindle, whereas if it's on my shelf, it's like looking at me, waiting to be read. However, Kindles do have their uses. I found it especially useful while I was doing my degree, because on Kindles you can underline stuff, you can highlight things, and then it creates a document in your Kindle which just has all the stuff you've highlighted, which made writing my dissertation so much faster. And also, it's so much easier to read on the tube with a Kindle because you only need one hand, whereas if you're reading a book you kind of need two. F. Fictional character you would have dated in school. This is a slightly weird question. I don't entirely know what to say, but I'm gonna say Jem Carstairs from the Infernal Devices trilogy because he seems quite nice. G. Glad you gave this book a chance. I'm gonna say A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing by Emma McBride. I opened the first page of this after I bought it, and I read the first page and I was like, oh my goodness, what have I done? I'm gonna hate this. However, I actually really liked it, ultimately. Basically, it's in stream of consciousness. I have a kind of love-hate relationship with stream of consciousness. I think it can sometimes be really effective, and I love it in short stories, but sometimes in longer works it doesn't really work for me. I really didn't like Will Self's Umbrella, for example. I just didn't get anything out of it. I found it really alienating, really inaccessible, and to be honest, a bit pretentious. But A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, I didn't find that with at all, because once I got used to the writing style, I found it very easy to follow what was happening, and I always kind of knew what was going on, and it just, I think the writing style really enriched the story. Overall, I found it a very powerful, if slightly disturbing and at times unpleasant book. H. Hidden Gem book. I'm going to say If Nobody Speaks of Remarkable Things by John McGregor, because this book is incredible and I never hear anyone talk about it. I read it maybe 6 months ago, just under a year ago, and I just was so impressed by it. It's basically a dual narrative. Half of it is a first-person perspective looking back on the events of one particular day. The other half is that day in present tense, third person, and it's just one of the most incredible books about the kind of beauty and significance of ordinary life, and it's just amazing and I love it. I. Important moment in your reading life. I'm going to say the discovery of Charles Dickens when I was 13 years old and I first read Our Mutual Friend, and it became immediately my favourite novel. It has now been my favourite novel for almost 10 years. I love this book so much. J. Just finished. The book I most recently finished before I started reading How to Be Both was the short stories of Catherine Mansfield. I've been reading this for months and months, on and off. If I'm reading a short story collection that was published as one, I try to read it in one go. I don't like leave it and dip in and out. But if I'm reading like the collected works or something and they weren't actually published all in one go, I often leave it like a little while between stories, which sometimes means it takes me ages and ages to finish them. But I really loved her short stories. They were absolutely fascinating. I will talk about them more in my wrap-up at the end of this month. K. Kinds of books you never read. I'd say the only kind of books that I never ever read are probably books like horror, because that just doesn't really particularly appeal to me. It's just not my cup of tea. L. Longest book you've ever read. Probably Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which as you can see is quite a length. This copy I have is 1,232 pages. I love this book. I think it's brilliant. I read it when I was about 14, 15, and I haven't reread it since because, you know, that would take me a while. I think it's a really great insight into the social history of 19th century France, and also, if you like the musical, it's really well worth reading and adds like a lot of new dimensions, because obviously there is a lot of stuff in this book that is not in the musical. It's just so good. Major book hangover book. I would probably say Rights by Sophie Cumberlew. I read this over a year ago, and I still think about this book on a weekly, if not daily basis. I think about this book all the time. I'm still trying to work out what I think of it. It is brilliant and incredible and unpleasant. Like, none of the characters are likeable, but all of them are sympathetic and interesting when you don't want them to be sympathetic because they're not very nice. And I think this is one of the best books I've ever read, but I wouldn't ever include it in like a favourites list because I'm not sure it would be right to say that I liked it, but it's so good. It's about 4 teenagers, but it's definitely not YA. These 4 14-year-olds one summer make a pact that they will all lose their virginity together in like 2 couples, and basically we have all the characters looking back on these events from 15 years on in time and kind of commenting on them, and it's just so messy and horrible and brilliant. Number of bookcases you own. Technically I only own like one bookshelf unit, but I also have several other places where books live, and basically any like surface in my room is space for books. One book that you've read many, many times. The book I've possibly read the most times is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. It's one of my favourite books, but also I studied it at school and then at university. I've read it at least 5 times, probably 8, probably 10. Preferred place to read. I don't really mind where I read. I quite like reading on the move, like I get a lot of reading done on trains and on the tube. Quote that inspires you. One of my favourite lines in all of Dickens's works is one from the Pickwick Papers, and it goes, "There are dark shadows on the earth, but its lights shine brighter in the contrast." And I think that pretty much sums up my worldview. Reading regret. I don't really have any books that I regret reading. Like, even books that I've read and hated, I'm still kind of glad I've read them. Like, for example, Dracula that I studied at A-level is one of my least favourite books of all time, but I'm really glad I read it because in getting very angry at a lot of them, the misogynistic views put across in Dracula, it kind of made me more of a feminist and made me think a lot more about gender issues that I hadn't really previously. So even though I didn't like it, the reaction I had to it kind of developed me as a person, so therefore I'm glad I've read it. Series that you started reading but you need to finish. I have quite a few. The main ones for me at the moment are the Shadowhunter series. I've read the Infernal Devices trilogy, but I do want to read the rest because I really enjoyed them. I know I'm not going to like Mortal Instruments as much because they're not Victorian, they're not going to be as good, they're not going to be as much the kind of thing I like, but I will still hopefully enjoy them, and I do have City of Bones. I bought it at the Young Adult Literary Convention, so I'm going to try and read that soon. The other series that I really need to finish is the Bartimaeus trilogy. I've got the 3rd one left, I've read the first 2. These are a great, nice YA series. Half the books are narrated by a demon, Bartimaeus, who is just one of my favourite narrators in all of literature, because he's just so funny and wonderful, it just makes the books a joy to read, and I really need to read the 3rd one. 3 favourite books of all time. My 3 favourite books of all time are Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens, Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens, and The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield, for a slightly more modern one. These 3 books are all incredible and I love them, and I've reread them many times and they're still wonderful and I love them, and at some point I will make a proper video talking about my favourite books. Unapologetic fangirl for. Definitely Charles Dickens. I mean, I went to the Charles Dickens Museum wearing a Dickens t-shirt. I have no shame. Very excited for this release. This one is not a book, but a literary thing, more accurately, a literary adaptation. Next year, there should be a film coming out called Love and Friendship, which is an adaptation of Jane Austen's novella Lady Susan. As I have talked about too many times in the last few weeks, I love Jane Austen's Lady Susan. It is brilliant and incredible and wonderful, and they're finally making a film of it. It is under the title Love and Friendship, which is really confusing because there's another Jane Austen short story called Love and Friendship, but the film Love and Friendship is an adaptation of Lady Susan, not of Love and Friendship. I don't know why they're calling that, it's really confusing. I'm really looking forward to the film. Hopefully it'll be really good, and hopefully it will bring more recognition to Lady Susan because it really deserves it. Also, I believe it has Stephen Fry and James Fleet in, so you can't go too far wrong with that. Worst bookish habit. Probably buying books faster than I can read them. X marks the spot. Start in the top left of your bookshelf and find the 27th book. 27th book on my bookshelf is Graham Greene's The Heart of the Matter, which I can't tell you anything about because I've yet to read it. This is what I mean about buying books faster than I can read them. Why? Your latest book purchase. My latest book purchase was actually Ali Smith's How to Be Both, which I'm reading at the moment. I bought it a couple of weeks ago. The last book that kept you awake when you should have been asleep. The last book that kept me up reading was A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. As I said in my last wrap-up, I read this all in one day. I got back to Bath after a very long day of train journeys and job interviews at like 11:30 at night because the train had been a mess. But I still had, at this point, like 70 pages left to read, and I just couldn't go to bed without reading them, so I just stayed up a bit too late reading this because it was so good. So there we go, that was quite a lot of questions. Hopefully this video won't be horrendously long, but I do like to ramble and there were a lot of different questions. In fact, accurately there were 26, weren't there? Anyway, as I said at the beginning of the video, I tag Verity and Lauren and I will link their channels down below. If you've read any of the many books I've spoken about in this video, please let me know what you thought of them, if you liked them, etc. And I will be back on Monday with some kind of discussion video about something. In fact, I'll be back on Monday with a discussion video and it will probably be about Jane Austen, I'm sorry. Bye!